look at the live comments. I'm always in the private chat.
All right, you are live, it says. So
Oh, some people are here.
Yeah.
Oh.
Lita, UK fan, yeah. Hey, Kevin. So yeah, chime in. Nikki, how are things in South Carolina?
Gosh. Oh my God, Wapaka.
Nice.
That's the same as the UK, isn't it?
What's that?
That's the same as the UK.
Same as the UK, Wapaka.
It's sort of amazing that we have people that are in the UK and then Wapaka.
I know, it's great.
You know, I love that.
Samantha, Shannon, Keith.
Hi.
Keith across the other pond.
Unreal.
Pond, Michigan.
Oh, technology.
I know. Toronto, sweet. We'll get started pretty soon. We'll let people kind of trickle in here, but and in the meantime, you got the double faces here because we're on
I know that's so funny. I was like, I look better in that other one. Can we just the other one?
Yeah, I've got a lighter room. It's a less cloudy day this time.
I know, and I just look like I don't know. I like this one better, I think.
Yeah. Better artificial lighting. Trisha, hey. One perfect speech. Oh, Jane from New Jersey, Heartland, Wisconsin, New Glarus, Tracy.
Gosh, look
Nikki,
at that.
sunny and 72. Oh,
Hi,
we're getting there.
Yeah, it is getting there.
Yeah. Slowly, right? Yeah, exactly. Fitchburg, Chicago. Hey, Sharon.
My gosh, this is so fun.
Green Bay. Yeah, I love watching this come in. Steamboat, Bobby. Aaron in upstate New York, Indiana.
Hi.
Pencils 321. That's a great name. Maggie, Mary Beth. Ooh, all right, Germany. We got one from Germany.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I wish there was a map. It showed up on a map.
That would be fun. Yeah. All right.
Well, everybody coming in.
What's that?
It's really fun to watch people coming in.
Yeah. Carlsbad, California. So we got coast to coast pretty much here. UK, Germany. Let's see how far west we can get. I don't know what time is it in Hawaii right now?
No idea.
No idea. I think they're 6 hours behind us right now.
I'm just so glad that you and I are on the same time zone. Otherwise, I'd be upstairs brushing my teeth right now.
Yeah, even if it were just 12:30.
Yeah. Having just woken up and had the first gin and tonic, like quarantine behaviors without borders. That's
right. Exactly.
Borders without boundaries.
Right. Writers without boundaries.
Yeah. I always said that my memoir was going to be Bad with Boundaries. That was going to be the name of my memoir.
Bad with Boundaries.
Yeah. I think that's too much of an advertisement.
Heidi, is it raining in Milwaukee? It's sunny here. I'm worried it's going to turn into that later.
Candace, hi.
8:33 in Hawaii. All right.
8:33. You've got a whole day yet.
Yeah, totally.
Oh, that sounds so nice, though.
Yeah. Right? Waking up in sunny Hawaii.
Well, I just feel like if I would have known ahead of time, if somebody would have said, like, we're going to batten down the hatches, pick a place, people.
Right.
This wouldn't have been my place. I would have been like, what? Wait a minute. I feel like I missed a bus.
I know. So certainly not in March.
No.
Yeah. You want to be in March.
No, I'm so glad I didn't get stuck somewhere.
Yeah. All right. Oh, Allison from Chicago. Maureen from Chicago.
Allison Hammer. Hey, Allison. You're not late.
No.
Still just making jokes.
Yeah, we're still just making jokes.
Amy Sue, what are you doing here, silly you?
All right. Well, we'll get started. I think we're in 5 minutes in, and we'll kick things off. So our previous session, and we're going to keep it small here, just so you guys know. Now would be the time to maybe go to just our phases. But last time I figured out that the resolution was really poor when we went to like this view. So we're just going to stick in this one pretty much the whole time. So what are we doing now? We've got, let me get my slides going here. All right. So last time, just to reiterate our previous session, we discussed creating a short synopsis for several story ideas and running them by people to see which one seems to garner the most interest. So Anne had done this with her most recent, her forthcoming book, which she's currently working on the edits on. She did this, I guess it was about a year ago, right? A little over a year ago?
Yeah, yes, which seems amazing that it was that long ago, but yeah.
Yeah, what a year. So yeah, about a year ago, sent these 5 synopses off to an agent with log lines and pitches. And so she did this, and her agent ranked those 5 synopses and said, yeah, I like this one. I think it looks really promising. And she went with that one. And it sold on a preempt, which means it wasn't completed, right?
Yeah, 20 pages. I had 20 pages and an outline, which is what we're kind of talking about, this outline idea here. Yeah.
And just to clarify, it's pretty rare that happens in fiction. That's kind of the normal way of operating in nonfiction, and it really is a shame that it's not the normal way of operating for other books. But it's not for fiction. But still, we talked about how you can still kind of employ this method by writing up several different synopses like this, like a back cover synopsis, basically, that hooks the reader but doesn't reveal the whole story. So you kind of say, like, here's the character, here's their current world. This thing happened and kicked off this desire or quest or want, and they faced these problems. And you're sort of really pretty cursory with what you're talking about in terms of the rest of the plot of the book, but you're just kind of laying out the book's premise. So that's really what this covers. And I guess before we move on, and so what I say here is that it's this synopsis is really premise heavy. You don't necessarily have the whole story imagined yet. You just kind of have your inspiration for it. And so I might just kind of, first of all, define what a premise is, and maybe give some examples. But Anne, how would you define a story premise?
I would define it as like a hook. It's your hook. It's sort of like the most interesting thing that sort of gets you thinking, oh, this would be a good idea. It's funny because I remember I had a conversation with an agent from quite a while ago. It was an agent that I didn't continue to agent with, but she was the head of this agency, and she was a no nonsense person. And she said, what do you have for an idea for your next story? And I said, well, I have this idea about a surgeon who shoplifts hospital supplies and then locks them in a cupboard in her house, in her bedroom. And she said, that's a premise, not a story. And she, like, this was done in the first 30 seconds of the conversation. And I was like, I know. I know. But that's exactly what it is. I mean, she was nailing it. And she, I am sure, has spent a lot of time in her life going, lady, that's a premise, not a story, to a lot of different people.
Right.
And so I think it's this interesting thing that is going to be the egg that you crack open, and then try to figure out what the story is within that premise.
I like that analogy. I'm going to add that here.
Okay, good, because if you don't write it down, I'll forget it. And then later on, somebody will say, what did you say about that egg? And I'm like, I like scrambled eggs. Like,
right.
I don't know.
Right.
It's good lunch food.
So that premise that you had, like the doctor, I mean, it's often kind of a what if statement. Like, what if a doctor shoplifted and for whatever reason, and then stored these things, right?
Yeah. It was an idea that, and you know, and I'll say again, and we're going to kind of go through an exercise a little bit later that walks you through this so that you're not going, what the heck, I'm not sure how to do this. Like, we actually have an exercise that will walk you through, and hopefully it'll be helpful to you. In fact, I know it will be helpful because I've used it quite a few times and people really come out knowing the difference between a premise and a story when we're finished. But but the idea for the dog year came from me watching a woman that was very well appointed get caught shoplifting in TJ Maxx, and I had this moment, and she looked so defeated when they caught her, and she also looked like she was going to make a run for it, which, you know, would have been both sad and comical, but. And I saw the way she looked when she realized that a run for it wasn't going to work. And I was so sad for her. And then literally 10 years later, I had this idea for the dog year. So yes, and it was literally 10 years later when I had this kind of fuller idea about it, because I didn't really know how to build a story back then.
Yeah. Okay, that's a really cool one. That kind of reminds me of there's an author named Jess Walter, who The Financial Lives of the Poets, Beautiful Ruins are a couple of his novels, and he has a short story I love and I've used in teaching called Anything Helps, which is about this this homeless alcoholic who's trying to kind of get his life back together, and he has a son who's in foster care, and he goes and he panhandles. And he writes anything helps on a piece of cardboard. But so that's kind of basically that kicks off the story, right? And I asked him at some point, I said, where did that idea come from for you to write this story? And he said, once I was in some restaurant with my wife and we were looking out the window and, we were about to walk into the restaurant and we saw this woman who had this sign, I don't know what it said, anything helps or something like that. And he said, I gave her $10, but then we went into the restaurant and we discussed, like, what do you think she's doing with that? And he said, I saw her a few days later coming out of a grocery store with kids. And he said, and it shamed me because our whole discussion was like what sort of drugs she was going to buy and that sort of stuff. And just, he had all these assumptions about it. And so he said that was really kind of what kicked it off. But so it's a sort of similar thing of like, you know, seeing this person and kind of, you know, not even judging so much as kind of imagining what is the life that they live, right? And what if they were this person, and what if these were the circumstances under which they lived, right?
Yeah, and actually we'll come back to that because that's a really good that's a good example for the next thing that we're going to talk about a little bit later.
Right. The egg. So then this is where we kind of went with this last time is we had a back cover synopsis, something like this, and we won't read this whole thing this time, but just to reiterate that the premise kind of turns into one of these short synopses. And again, you can look back at the last video. These are all recorded and there's the same links that I send out for watching them the first time. So they're still up and running. And so you can look back at that one and kind of see I've looked at several of these synopses and these kind of hook synopses, I might call them. And they seem to have like these traits to them. They establish the main character and their status quo, kind of their current world. They give a sense of the inciting incident, you know, when this happened. And like, if we look back here, you know, let's see, when neither Samantha nor Holly can imagine a world without their friend in it. So it's all about this friend of theirs, right? That Katie Martin, this friend of theirs, has cancer and it's back with a vengeance. So that's what's going to kick off this whole story here. But so that's the inciting incident. Then the characters desire a quest, like what are they going to do as a result of that inciting incident? And then you really kind of, you go over quickly, but the conflicts they'll face, and then the stakes, which are often going to end in the hook is going to end with something along the lines of, if they don't accomplish this, or if they do accomplish this, or, here's what's at stake. And you give kind of a hook about what sort of transformation or change they're going to be facing.
Mm-hmm.
So those are kind of the ingredients. And my most recent blog post kind of went into that. So again, not to belabor these points here, because I want to get into this kind of more exciting stuff about how do you build it from here. So really the question is, what comes next? We have the premise. And after this premise, what do we do once we have this story idea? Once you've seen this woman in TJ Maxx shoplift, and then you imagine this, her life, where do we go from there?
Mm-hmm. And so I think I know a lot of people do this. They get their premise and then they write forward from the premise, meaning they have this hook and they think the hook is the story. But the premise is not the story, and the hook is not the story. All it is an interesting nugget that is going to be told. It's going to be sort of blocking your character from getting what they want. Mm-hmm. And so instead of writing forward on the premise, you have to figure out who the character is and write forward on the character. And I see that Hudson Rotary Club, Stephen King says he creates a character and a situation and never a plot, and then starts letting the characters write the scene for him. And that's what we're suggesting exactly. And it seems like a very easy kind of thing to do, but it's also super easy to get hooked back into the premise instead of the character and building the character out. And the reason it's so hard is that you're making up the character. So the character could, like if I asked you, if you had a piece of popcorn stuck in your tooth, what would you do? And if it was really causing you problems, you'd probably go straight up and get it out of your tooth. Like I can ask you that. But if your character had to do something and your character isn't you, then you have to figure out who your character is. And there's an awful lot of assignments that go through helping you figure out who your character is. You can write a history for them. You can read the zodiac for them. You can give them a job and figure out who they are with that. And all of those things are fine things to do. But we have to look at, again, it's the intersection between character and premise. So, for example, in The Dog Year, I thought really heavily about, okay, who is this well-dressed person that is shoplifting? Well, we actually know that often shoplifters, if they're not, high school kids shoplifting eyeliner, then they can very often be wealthy women. And there's a lot of psychology behind that. And a lot of it has to do with societal pressure and never being good enough and things like that. But my character wasn't shoplifting eyeliner. She was shoplifting hospital supplies specifically. And so I had to take a look at, why would a plastic surgeon do that as her coping mechanism for life? What was she trying to cope with? And it had to have been something big enough that she would, and hard enough that shoplifting, the very thing that is probably the least most in her personality, what would do that? And so then I have to kind of drill down into that character to figure out what's going to happen next. Like, for example, say she gets caught shoplifting in the store, then, then it goes forward in a way that we would all expect it to. The police come, they decide to press charges or they don't. Does her job get suffering? Like, what happens next? And then it's just like anybody would shoplift. And that's not a very interesting story. We always ask writers, why this story? Why you? Why now? Mm-hmm. So you have to ask your character that. Why hospital supplies? Why you? Why now? Mm-hmm. And then you have to sort of spiral through the ideas of what it is that sort of they thought the only place for them to go was to shoplift. Mm-hmm. And then you have to look at, what does your character want? So my character, she's shoplifting hospital supplies. She's a surgeon. She works in a hospital. Why hospital supplies? She doesn't need them. They're there. So I had to look at and drill down who that would be and why and what did she want.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just get to make it up. Like I get to make it up in my head and then move forward from making it up. It's really interesting because one of the things, I should say this right away. So I finished the book that I'm working on, and I have my editor has read it and gave me some sort of broad ideas about it, and I made some more changes. And then they work with another editor who literally goes in there with a microscope. And I was told to don't panic because it's going to be, a lot. And it was a lot. It's 9 single-spaced pages of suggestions. And every single suggestion is for me to go deeper into the character and what the character wants and showing the arc of what she wants through characterization. Mm-hmm. So here I have written the book and finished it, 300 pages. I wrote it well enough in the beginning that it's sold. I finished it. They've accepted it. They've made enough of a commitment to it to edit it in the forms that it is. And still, I have to go back in and make these very subtle additions to the story that mirror the arc of the character in terms of what they want and what's in their way. Mm-hmm. Because, as we said before, a story is not what happens in the book. The story is the emotional journey of the character as they try to get what they want and get knocked out of the way every time they get a little bit closer to it.
Yeah.
That's what a story is. The story is the emotional journey. And Tim and I were talking about this, and I thought to myself, no one ever talked to me about that. So I had written 3 books without anyone having said that to me. And I had gone to lots of conferences, and the conferences, were really good about teaching me lots of things: how to write pretty sentences, how to talk in scene, how to be in scene, how to organize my book, how to make time for writing. But I don't remember, and I taught at 3 MFAs, and I don't remember any of those instructors saying it has to be a story is the desire. Now, I'm not saying, and they were great instructors. I'm not saying they weren't fantastic instructors. I learned so much from them. But when I understood what a story was, and that it wasn't the plot, the mechanics of the plot, and it was the emotional journey of the protagonist, it made my writing so much clearer. And maybe I just didn't hear it. Maybe they said it to me over and over, and I didn't hear it the way that they said it, which is probably true. I'm not.
Well, and as you say, like it's something you keep working at constantly. Like no one ever really masters this. And even if you do, it still is, it's because you work at it over and over again. And it's an iterative thing where you do it once and you think like, okay, I've done this, but you're still going to get edits back that say, okay, but why did the character do this? Or
yes,
this be a good place to go into some backstory, or
Yes, and that's what I'm getting throughout the whole thing. And I just told Tim I was working on it. It took me 2 days to get through 20 pages because this kind of writing is really subtle writing. I can't just fix it with a new scene. I have to really think hard about who those characters are, what I've created, and make sure that I'm doing something that is emotional and full, to the story and to the characters.
Right.
It's fascinating. Martin said, do you push back when the editor has something you don't want to change? Yeah, well, mostly they don't. Like in my experience with my books, I haven't really been pushed in a way that's changed the story. They've only asked me to add more to make it's sort of like, it's like sculpting, although I'm not a sculptor, but every time you give another tick or another scraping or another sanding, you make the head come out or the nose come out more and look more like what you want it to look like. And that's what they're sort of asking me to do. I have not had anyone make me change the story or the plot or a character in any real way. And I think if they did, certainly I would push back if there was something that I didn't agree with. So far, I agree with everything, and I really think that the readings are giving me a much clearer view of what I was trying to do. But I would push back if I thought that there was something in it that needed to be pushed back. So there's that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So yes, it can be very subtle, and I think that's where the very careful writing comes in, and the word choice and the sentences and things like that. Like, I spend a lot of time getting people in and out of cars, which is a very clunky thing to do. So I'm not surprised sometimes that I haven't added the right memory here and there, or I haven't, created a character quite as fine-tuned as I might have liked to.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if I said this before in the first one or not, but I was reading Testaments, the second Gilead novel, The Handmaid's Tale, To the Handmaid's Tale, and in the back of it, Margaret Atwood wrote, "Thank God for my editors and the people that have read the story and told me I would never get away with that." Or something was excellent. And I thought, wow, if Margaret Atwood needs an editor, then I guess it's fine that I need somebody telling me what to do too. It made me feel better, it made me feel like, okay, the masters could use a little help occasionally.
Yeah. No, I think, and I always tell people, like, you look at the acknowledgments section of any book, and like, as capable as any author is, it's always just filled with, here are people who helped me out. There's always an element of it takes a village, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think, what we're talking about here is the arc of the character. What they want is the emotion, because even if they want to conquer a world, there must be a reason for that conquering. And that want is always emotional. Always. Want is an emotion. It's a very strong emotion.
Mm-hmm.
So like, if we think for a minute of, say the Hunger Games, which seems so plot driven. It is plot driven, but what she wants is to save her family. And the thing that's knocking her off her beam all the time is they're trying to kill her. So if she's dead, she can't save her family.
Yeah.
And so the story is the emotional journey of whether she's going to be able to save her family or not. And I always say that, like, even in a zombie movie, you see, like, I remember that one that Brad Pitt was in, and you're watching him run with the zombies that are like this rolling ball of zombie behind them. It's the weirdest thing. And he and his family are, running or driving, and all behind them are all these people that are getting eaten up in the zombie ball. And all you care about is Brad Pitt and his family, because you're so emotionally invested in them. Like, you don't give a crap about all the dead people behind them because you're not emotionally invested in them, and you are emotionally invested in their desire to stay alive. And so even in a zombie movie, if we didn't care about Brad Pitt, he'd be just another one of the people that the zombie ball got, and it wouldn't matter.
Right.
So it's always desire and character that moves the plot forward. I was just reading a review of a book that I just read recently, and they said, well, this is clearly a literary book because it's character driven. And I was like, all books are character driven.
Right.
Hidden a little bit better.
Right.
And the character is subtle, or their desire is a little bit subtle. It's between, I want to save my family versus I want to be loved.
Yeah, I'm fond of a David Lodge quote that says the job of the artist is to make people feel. And we're writing stories. It's a story, and it's not an essay. It's not it's not a persuasive essay. It's not a textbook. The story it's all about the emotional connection to the audience or to the reader, right?
Uh-huh.
So we have where we're at right now is we have maybe a premise. We're starting early on with a story, and really at any stage of the story. But the next step then is to kind of mine for the actual story, right? As you say, to write forward from character, not from the premise, and to really be thinking about the character and where they're coming from and what they want, etc. Krista, I saw your question. We're going to get to that one a little bit later. And I think some of the stuff about making the deeper emotional connection to the character is also going to come out as we talk about what we're talking about here. But if we don't get to that, Krista and Bobby, make sure to raise these questions again. But so where do we go next? When you think about your premise, and from the premise, from the short synopsis, now what?
Well, this I think is where we get into this exercise where we want people to start thinking about how to do this and how to figure out what the character wants, because you figure out what the character wants because you have to figure out why it's interesting to you. And so is this where we start to give them a little bit of work to do?
Yeah.
Okay, so what I want you to do is, and you may have done this already, and certainly people that have taken classes with me before have done this, but I do it every time. And so I'm going to make you do it too. But the first thing I want you to think about is like, when was it that you first thought, oh, this is an idea for a book? And we don't have that much time, so I'm not going to take time to let you write that down, but I want you to do that after this class. I want you to think to yourself, okay, when did I think about that? So like for the dog era was this idea of, I saw the shoplifter lady, and I Like You Just Fine When You're Not Around, it was, I wanted somebody to be able to call and ask if my husband was playing fair in the divorce. And so I created a radio show. And On Maggie's Watch, we had a sex offender move into the neighborhood, and I started thinking about, being passive aggressive somehow. And then I thought, but I wouldn't do that. And I thought, who would? And then I created a character. So I want you to think for a minute, when did you first think, this would kind of be an interesting book? And then the next thing I want you to think is why? Why do you care about that? Why do you care about that? Like, why did I care about the woman shoplifting? Why did I care about having somebody be fair? And I think you can only answer that question yourself. It's not something that anybody can say, yeah, that's right. You're the only one that can answer that. And as an example of that, I just read Dear Edward, and by Anne. I gave that book to my friend to read, Napolitano, I think her name is. And it's a fantastic book, and you should read it for lots of reasons. But the story premise is a family gets on an airplane, and it crashes, and only one person survives, and it's the little boy of the family, and he's 12. And so I don't know her. I don't know Anne. But the premise or the idea is one person survives an airplane crash. And if I think about, well, that would be a great idea for a book. And why do I care? Well, I think I care about that because I think I want to be the one person, or do I? And then I might think,
right,
what if you were that person? And I think we all want to know, and I always think this is funny, but I want to know, am I going to be the one that like saves the day or pees my pants in the bathroom? Like, I want to know, am I the one that's going to survive? And then I want to know, what would I do with that survival? What would it be like to lose your family? What would it be? And can you survive something like that? So that's the interesting piece.
Mm-hmm.
Can you survive? And people might read it to go, I want to know if I could survive. How did this boy do it? And so that's why we say, like, why do we care? And so then the next thing is, what are you trying to say? And so I don't know what Anne was trying to say, but to me, she said things like, you can survive. And she also said, and it might be different for a kid versus an adult. And how might it affect you if you were in such a big traumatic situation? would you be able to survive from it, and what does it mean? And so, and it also gives me an idea of empathy for somebody who's gone through a big crisis, and that big crisis could be a divorce. It doesn't have to be a plane crash.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think what I want you to do in your story is you think, okay, I think this might be a good idea for a book, this premise. Why am I interested in that? What does this say about me? What am I trying to figure out? It's like Joan Didion said, I write to see what I'm thinking.
Mm.
And I think I want you to look at that, because why you're looking at that is why other people might be interested, which would be awesome later on when you're trying to put your book idea, because you can then say, I think they're interested in this because I'm interested in this, and this is why. And then, what are you trying to say? And when we say, what are you trying to say? Most books do have a theme. We try very hard not to be on a soapbox, and we try to get people to hear the theme without it being shoved down their throat. Nobody wants to be preached to. But what are you trying to say, and why can you say it better than anybody else can say it?
That's good. Yeah.
Because we know all stories have been told. So the only thing that's different is our perspective.
Right.
And why is that interesting? What is it that we have to say, and why do we think we're going to be able to say it?
So these sorts of questions, and really kind of getting down to the significance of your story, or to the theme, or whatever you want to say it. And I always sort of define theme as the what the events of the story mean for the character.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why, like, these questions, though they don't seem like they're necessarily the basis of your character, they really are.
They absolutely are. Yeah.
Because you're going to write forward looking at why these ideas are important to you, why this premise is important to you, why you care about it, and what you ultimately want to be saying with it is going to have an enormous influence on what the character then does in the story, right?
Mm-hmm. And that's what the story is. A character walks through, because they want something, and they must want it bad enough that they're willing to get through all of the things that you throw in their way.
Mm-hmm.
And those wants must mean something to them. And you have to figure out what they mean to you, so that you can drive your character through the story.
So to reiterate here, the heart of your story idea is kind of what we're looking at first, so that we can then move into some questions about character. But with Dear Edward, the premise, what if someone is the sole survivor of an airplane crash?
Mm-hmm.
Why I care about this is to explore how any of us survive ending up alone. Mm-hmm. And what are you saying? That there might be, not to spoil the story, so we could certainly delve into this more, but we might end up spoiling the story. What are you saying? That there might be some way to survive, right? That's really what she's doing then in the book, is exploring the things that end up keeping him alive. And also in various ways. Like, obviously he physically survived, but now what's at stake is maybe his emotional survival, or a spiritual survival, or something like that throughout the rest of the book, right? Okay, so we have this, and then we're going to move into character. Character and their want, right, or their desire. So what's next for us then? We have these three questions, and sort of lingering on these, hoping you guys have written this down, but you can go back and look right around the 35-minute mark for this.
Yep. So the next thing is that, so who is your story about, and what they want? And I always use this, and I know the people that have taken these classes from me before know exactly what I'm going to say when I say this, is that, like, if, for example, I realize that my phone is dying while I'm writing and I need it, then I will go upstairs to get my power cord. And if I get to the top of the stairs and I forget what I was going for, which is often, what happens? I stop moving. The story's over. If you're watching me, if there was a camera, you'd be like, there she goes up the stairs. And then she stops. And then she goes back downstairs and sees her phone again. And, oh, yeah, I need the power cord. Then you go up. So the minute you forget what your character wants, and the intensity of that want, the story stops moving forward. Because if without that very strong want, and I always say want is stronger than, it's the strongest word in the English language except for love. And love is emotion and want, right? So you have to figure out what it is that, who your character is, what they want, right? What stands in their way, and where are they going to end up? And where you think you want them to end up. Mm-hmm. And so what stands in their way has to be something that is their Waterloo. Like it has to be the worst thing. So, for example, in Dear Edward, the boy just wants to grow up to be a normal boy with his brother and his mom and dad. He's 12. What else do you want? And they're moving to a new town, and so he's worried about that. And then the question is, what if you take that desire away from a 12-year-old boy? Take it all away. Family's gone, new town's gone, everything about it and gone, including his anonymity, because now he's the miracle boy. And so he's the miracle boy that everybody thinks he's the miracle boy, and he feels like garbage, like the worst. He's got guilt about surviving. He misses his brother. He misses his parents. He doesn't know where to go. He doesn't know what to do. And I don't want to go too much into that, but so he just wants to be normal again. Mm-hmm. And so floundering around trying to figure that out.
So this want, which, I think, I guess a question that comes up and has already come up here is, can this be an abstraction or not?
No, it can't be.
So They need to want something that they can actually attain.
Yeah, it has to be tangible. And even if they can't attain it, like there's been stories where people want to fly, you know what I mean? And they can't. They'll end up instead, writing a book because they can't fly, and so they'll fly in a different way, in a metaphorical way. So it has to be something that they actually can go towards. They can actually move toward that. So like, I want to be loved is a little bit it's too abstract. Everybody wants to be loved, mostly people do, or feared, I suppose. But, and I also think that that's such an abstract thing that you can only do that so much as, be a nice person and look pretty or something. Like, I don't know how you actually move forward in that way, unless it's a very, very specific, I want to be loved by this person, or I want to be loved by the people of Wisconsin, so I'm going to be a senator. I want to be loved by, my children, even though I was terrible to them at one point. You have to be a little bit more specific, because otherwise it's all of the choices of the world, and that's too many choices for a writer.
So, and I often talk about how there may be, you might be able to add like a "so that" clause to whatever this tangible desire is. Mm-hmm. I mean, you really should be able to add that. So like, like with Edward, and maybe the way I've phrased it here, to grow up to be a normal boy seems abstract, but like to regain some semblance of normalcy in his life is something where we can kind of see that happen, right? Mm-hmm. That's the more concrete or tangible thing.
Oh my God, and it's so universal because everybody keeps talking about this virus time, right? When are we going to go back to normal?
Right.
We're trying really, so people are doing all kinds of things, like they're reading articles that tell them, get on a schedule, make sure you work out, like do this, and everybody else is like, I'm drinking at 2. Is that okay? Like, well, is that normal? Not really. So what do we do? So that's a very common, the way that you phrased it may be broad, but it's not outside of the realm of what we're trying to do. Normal for him is, I want a family. I want to be,
right.
I just don't want to be the miracle boy right now.
But there is an abstract dimension to the want, which is that, so that I can feel loved, right? So that was like something that's too abstract, is, I want to feel loved. So we need some sort of tangible manifestation of the abstract thing they want, right?
And then Maggie makes a good point. Yeah, that want changes as they move forward, because it's almost as if you start out with one want and then you hone it through your barriers, right? So, and it's just like you do anything in life. Like maybe maybe I want to be Adele, and then I decide that maybe it's okay for me to just sing in the church in my town, right? So, because the barriers to that change your dimension, and you decide what you're willing to give up and what you're not willing to give up to move towards your first thing. And that's an interesting story. Like, how did you come to that? How did you be okay with that? How did that? And I think that's what we want to see in people. How did you live through that? How did you make a decision to do that? How did that work? And people are always asking me process for my book writing. And I think what they're really asking is, how did you move those boulders out of the way to get to the place where you could finish something? And honestly, that's what we're saying to our characters. How are you going to move past these boulders? And are you going to keep moving past these boulders to the extent that you will give up all else in your life? There was many years ago, there was a story of a man who was going to be the oldest person to summit Everest. And they talked all about his training. I read this big, long article about his training and everything. And then at the very last minute, he got to that step. What is that? Ed whose step? Somebody's.
Oh, yeah. I know what you're saying.
Yeah, the very last step before he summits, and a storm rolls in, and they said, we can summit, but we may not be able to get down. And the guy was like, yeah, I'm not going up then. And he left. And my students were all like, oh, that was so uninspirational. Why'd you make us read that? And I was like, it takes more courage to say no and change your goal. And it's more interesting than if he would have pushed through, got to the thing and died, or pushed through, got to the thing and went back down. We'd be like, oh, good for you. And we'd move on.
Right.
The fact that he stopped was super interesting to me. Like, how do you stop?
Yeah.
Move forward through a desire or a want. And then how do you get to the place where you decide that something else is okay? And that's a very long way to get around to what Maggie was saying in her comment here. That the really interesting stories are how those people change their desires.
Right. And also worth noting that just because they have the desire doesn't mean they need to attain it. You can have a story where they don't gain their goal, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes that's the more satisfying story.
Yeah. So we were toying with the idea of maybe like kind of doing something like this on the fly, like going from a premise to kind of the heart of the story, to who it's about and what they want. And so I don't know. I mean, is there some idea you had recently that you want to explore? Should we have someone throw something out at us and kind of do this impromptu?
Well, either way, one of the things we were joking about was that I was laughing because every time I send out an email, 50 people unsubscribe. And I was like so sad about that, because every time I look up, I'm like, all these people are like losing my email address. And then we were like, well, wouldn't that be a funny premise for a story? Like the woman who every time she's built up her thing and 50 people unsubscribe. So one day she has a drink and she writes in the email, anybody who doesn't want to follow me, get out now. And then she loses everybody. And then I think, well, what would be the problem with that? Well, I'd have to make it so that was not a good thing, that she lost everything. Like maybe she was an influencer and she had a big contract with a makeup company or something, and they were going to pull the company. And so what? So maybe she has a dog that's sick or a mother that's sick and she needed that money. But she was so tired of taking care of her mom that she had a drink and told everybody to go, screw off. And this is how you do it. Like, and this is how Tim and I do it. Like, I come up with a ridiculous premise and then I say, I think I should just write to them all and go, yeah, Go follow somebody else. And then Tim does that. He laughs. And then we talk about, who would that person be that had made this great, email list where she had, 30,000 subscribers, and then she pisses them all off and they leave. And then what?
Right. And exploring exploring the plausibility and authenticity of it, right? Like this would have to have real stakes. Right. Rather than just being sort of like annoying and, very low level hurtful that 50 people unsubscribe. It would have to be, her livelihood or some aspect of her survival is at stake.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Or somebody that she really cares about, even more so, because we can be more sympathetic to somebody who's trying to save the cat, right?
Right.
Or the dog or the mother, whatever. And also maybe they're at their wit's end because they've been doing it for so long and they're tired. And they decided, they opened up their email after having one drink too many and 50 people unsubscribed or 200 or whatever. And she was like, I'm sick of this. I'm going to go work at the Home Depot from now on. And then she wakes up the next morning and everybody's gone. And she's like, uh-oh.
Yeah.
And I kind of like that idea, because who is the person that could have 100,000 email lists? They must have been really a nice person.
Right.
And maybe they weren't doing themselves. And so maybe the journey is, who is she really?
Who is she really? Because what she's going to have to do to lose that many people is something that flies in the face of
everything she was.
Everything she was and everything those people have bought into or believed in for her, right? So she's going to totally betray her whole cause.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Which calls to question, like, why did she ever begin this cause in the first place?
Right. And Maureen here says, Margaret Atwood says, the goofier the better as a premise. And honestly, it's kind of like the goofier, what she means by that is that it has the higher stakes, right? The wackier piece of it, even if it doesn't end up being wacky in your story, that's what you're working back from. Because, we're most interested in those people that kind of lose their minds, because we wonder, unless they're, sort of viably diagnosed, right?
Yeah.
We're really interested in the person that loses their nut, the normal person that sort of loses their nut. We're sort of interested in them. I'm interested in them because I feel like I'm like one cup of coffee away from losing my nut most of the day. So I always said, like, teaching at the university, I was one YouTube video away from unbelievable scandal. And I got so sick of my students. I was so mad at them half the time. And those are the more interesting stories, even if they end up being more subtle. And honestly, that's a good example, Maureen, about Margaret Atwood, because really the story in The Handmaid's Tale is this woman just wants to make her own choices. And that's a small thing. So she's made this elaborate world that's forcing her to no longer have her own choices, but really that's all she wants.
Uh-huh.
And she's pushed and pushed and pushed to the point where she is not going to allow it anymore. And but her grand thing is not to collapse Gilead. It's so that she can have her kid back. She wants to make her own choices. It's about her.
Mm-hmm.
And then she realizes, like, oh crap, I'm going to have to collapse Gilead to do it.
Right.
And we're all like, oh boy. And I think that's why it's universal. Like, we all just want to make our own choices, and we all just want to save the people that we love.
Absolutely. And with this one about, the influencer, I like Krista's idea here. What if she's someone who is always hidden behind the screen and now she's forced to come out?
Mm-hmm.
That's really compelling. And Chuck recommends, what about the few who don't leave her? Yeah. And so, like, it brings the question of, like, the cause. What is she doing? Did she ever believe in it to begin with? The whole angle of the influencer and, like, what does it mean to be an influencer? When you really start exploring this, and we're kind of in this step right now, really. is to think about, yeah, why is this a compelling idea? Because at first it seems like, well, this is just based on,
Yeah.
our gripes about, having people unsubscribe to email. But
Hmm.
it's actually about more than that.
So much more.
It's about that, when you can quantify unacceptance, right? When you can quantify rejection, it's something that hurts maybe even more than quantifying your likes, right? Like
Hmm.
there's a small, you know, there's a small dose of dopamine or whatever with somebody likes your stuff on social media, but it almost hurts more when somebody hates it, right?
Hmm.
So like those are some of the universal aspects of this, and could really get us down the rabbit hole with who might this person be and what do they actually want.
Right. And, I think it's very funny that I have to call you Hudson Rotary Club. But he says, are all are all protagonists the author in some respect, writing what you know? I would say yes and no, but one of the reasons I kind of want to talk about that just briefly is that I think that just by being human, we know some of the travails of being human. Like I wrote about in the dog year, I wrote about a woman who lost her child in utero. And then after I wrote that, a lot of people said, I'm sorry to hear you lost a child in utero. And I've never lost a child in utero. But I know what grief is. And then other people have said to me, they could just find when you're not around, there's a woman with Alzheimer's in it. And they said, that story that you wrote about your mother, that I wrote that story before my mom was really very sick. It just took a really long time to publish that book because I wrote that actually second, not third. And my mom wasn't that far gone, but I had been a nurse to Alzheimer's patients, and I understood what that was about. And so, yes, I do think that you write what you know, but in this regard, you know people, right? But I also think, and actually, I don't want to get into this too much, but it's a very important thing to think about whether you're the person to write the story. There's an awful lot of discussion about other voices and those kinds of things. And I think that's too large, and we don't need to talk about that right now. But if you want to read about that, read about the American Dirt scandal. And then also, there's an awful lot of conversation about how those voices are represented and who needs to write those stories. So, which I think is important dialogue, but not necessarily for us right now.
Right.
But I do think, like very many of my stories are 100% fiction. I just make them up. I make them based on a premise. But I do know what it's like to be a woman.
And you're based in an emotional truth that might be
exactly.
It's something you can relate to, but it's otherwise,
Yeah, an emotional truth, I think. And I mean, I think, like, even Stephen King, like, if you look at Stephen King's work, like, I was watching the movie. I don't read a lot of his stuff because it's so creepy. And like, I remember one of his books, I literally smelled something after I read it. I walked outside and put it in the garbage because I was like, I should not be able to smell that smell. And it completely freaked me out. But I was watching The Outsider, I think it is, or The Outsiders.
Outsider, yeah.
And I was like, it's a universal truth to be afraid of something that you can't see. The Outsiders is like COVID. It's like the virus. It's like we're afraid of that. So even though his stuff is super wacky, right? It comes down, it's drilled down to the universal truth of wanting to be alive and save your family and not get eaten and not have a bad thing happen, right?
Right.
And I feel like I'm going a little far afield on this, but I don't think you can drill down too far or spend too much time talking about what does the character want, because if you figure out what the character wants, then you can also figure out how to take it away in a meaningful way.
Right.
And that's what we're talking about. Like the roadblocks that they get have to be the ones that make that character miserable, not you miserable. Or not the world miserable. Like it's a very good example to say, like, in Dear Edward, we didn't put him through a flood too. Like mostly, they took away his family. They put him in an airplane crash. He ended up living in a place that he wouldn't have expected to have to live in. But then we didn't also give him a flood. Because a flood, he's already gone through the hardest thing. He should be able to go through a flood too. That's not his problem. His problem is, I want to be normal. A flood would just give him another reason to be not normal, but not in a way that is important to him. We need to build on him moving forward. And one of the things that happens in the story is that people don't let him just be the normal boy. They want him to be the miracle boy. And that's not something he can control. And so what's he going to do with that?
So we've got the premise, we've got maybe a synopsis, and now really what we're asking people to do is to really just think through, like, okay, why were you captivated by this idea, and then how does that influence who your character is and what they want?
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of this, we were talking earlier, you and I, about kind of how there's a lot of, in the writing advice world, a lot of like step-by-step, and guides, and how really, if we're saying like, this is the next step, it's that, sure, this is the next step, but it's going to be a step that you revisit. And it's also not so much a step, but there is something concrete you can do. You can kind of like fill out these questions and give yourself a start with some of these questions that we've written down. But it's really thought work that we're asking you to do, right? Mm-hmm. Is to spend some time really thinking about your answers to these questions and tossing around some ideas about, like, well, who is that influencer, for instance, and why did they want what they wanted, and what is it that they want, and so it's sitting down with this and kind of thinking, okay, how does this premise push me into a character that I can now really live with, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what I'm interested in. One of the things I said to Tim when we were talking about this is that often, we want to do this, like people, writers, me, I want to have it a nice, clean, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. But if I could teach you in 3D, I would teach you in 3D, but I can't. So there's only this two-dimensional, try this, try this, try this. But it's like the Stephen King quote where, you figure out your character and have them write it. I wish it were that easy. Like it would be lovely if it were that easy. And I'm sure maybe it is for him because he's done like 80 billion books. But for me, it's much more work than that. And I have to keep going back to, what does she want? Who is she? Making sure that I go in the right direction for that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I think we're going to have some time for questions. So if people have some questions, then go ahead and start chiming in the chat, and we'll get to those. Once again, this is if you can, this is it's something free we're putting together, and we want to keep these free for sure. And we have fun doing these. We have 4 more of these planned, which I'll go over in a sec. But subscribe to us and check out Anne's book. You can tip if you'd like. We're sort of thinking we're keeping them free, but if you think this is at least worth as much as an hour-long session of writing in the coffee shop you can't go to right now, and buying the coffee and pastry you can't buy right now, maybe consider giving us a quick tip. Here's what's coming. Next Wednesday, we're looking at building this idea out a little bit more. So you've got this character and what they want. I'm going to elaborate a little bit more about what you should consider to ensure.
There's a little feedback.
What's that?
There's some microphone feedback. There's a little microphone feedback every once in a while on your side, I think. I don't mind, but it sounds a little bit like you got a muskrat on your,
Muskrat. I'll set the muskrat aside. Yeah. So the next one, building out your idea, what you should consider to ensure your idea becomes a story rather than just a plot. So that's what we'll talk about next time, and then we'll touch upon story structure, pitch worthiness, logline, and comps. There is what's after that? There's a page. Oh, it's down in the description of the YouTube video where you can look at a page that I have, where I've just put together the agenda, where the schedule for this. And here it is too. Blog, stormwritingschool.com, pitch to manuscript. If you look at that, that has the remaining schedule on it. So yeah, so questions. If you have questions, chime in here. Yes, thought work, Maggie, definitely neglected and glossed over. And I think it counts as writing.
You know, and I will say this too, and since I have a minute here, is that and I see a lot of writers on Twitter in particular, or even on Facebook, saying, "Oh, I wrote 2,000 words today," or "It's the 5 a.m. writing group, and I'm writing this many words." And I really think you should mute that stuff, because it's not how many words you put in, or it's not even when you write, or it's not. Sometimes your writing is happening when you're walking the dog, or because that thought work cannot be underestimated. And so I hear people say, "I'm going to write 3,000 words today," and they're like, "Yay, me! I wrote 3,000 words." And I think that's awesome. I mean, that's great, but the message is, the message to other people, or the message that other people hear sometimes is, "I'm not really doing a good job. I'm not writing enough." And I think sometimes that's the problem. People write forward before they're ready to write forward. And then once it's written down, they think that's the story. Because then they'll be like, "Well, that's not what happened in the book." And I'll think, "I know, it shouldn't have happened that way in the book." So that's why we're suggesting do all of this work, all of it, before you open up a sheet of paper and start to writing, because open up a sheet of paper is the more glorious thing to do, for sure. But it is also something that can be a false movement forward if you haven't done the thought work beforehand. Like, for example, the guy that wrote Remains of the Day, I can't possibly say
Ishiguro, yeah.
Oh, yes, him. And if you read about how he wrote that, he'll say, like, he shut himself for 2 weeks into his house and wrote The Remains of the Day. And I think, don't tell people that, because he must have been thinking about that story for years before he wrote it. I'm certain he was, in some level or not. And I think that, we don't help writers when we say those kinds of things. It's the same thing that we were talking about when I said I wrote 5 pitches. Well, I did write those 5 pitches, but it took me 15 years to learn how to write those pitches. It took me literally 15 years. And I had to go to New York and work with writers on a regular basis, teaching them how to do the pitches, so that I finally learned how to do the pitches. So to say that I sat down and wrote them in 2 weeks makes it sound like you should be able to do that. And I'm shocked I can do it. And I've really been working on that. So and that we really want to be able to say quantifiable, I went through the list and I did all this stuff, and those things are important. But the larger piece, a story happens in a 3D way, not in a linear way. So give yourself a break.
Yeah.
Sometimes, like we keep saying, you got to find the least annoying person that you know to talk to about this.
Right.
And Tim is my least annoying person. I'm sure I'm the most annoying person, probably, at this point. But I think that that's a really important thing, because you have to have somebody that'll not be offended when you yell at them and say, "No, you can't do that." And sometimes, I can do it best when I'm being paid, because I don't feel so bad yelling at him then, because I can say, "Well, you paid me to do this, and I'm just going to tell you, and this is the way it is."
Right.
Sometimes when it's a friend, I feel less available to do that.
Yeah, true.
So it's not easy, is my point. Yeah.
Marty asks, can a want be misplaced, i.e. the real want is something else that the protagonist doesn't understand? Yeah,
even better. And because then by the end of the story, the arc is that they now newly understand it.
Yeah.
Because in the dog year, my character wants more than anything to have her dead husband back. That's what she wants. And she goes forward in this bizarre way to try to get that, knowing full well she can't have it. And there's no way it's going to happen. So yes, absolutely. It can start out with a want that is the most ridiculous want, right?
What exactly does it look like
And
when your
then
character comes alive and is writing the story? And do you have that experience with your characters when you're writing?
yeah, somebody asked me this yesterday at this book club thing that I did, and I was like, yeah, I actually will, because sometimes I'll be writing and I'll be so deep into my character that when I come back to it later, I'm like, that's a good sentence. Did I steal that from somebody? Like, where did that come from? Because I'll be surprised sometimes that my characters will come out with stuff. But then there are just as many times that my character says something that's completely out of character. So there are times when I feel like I'm so deeply, and Csikszentmihalyi, he's the guy that sort of coined the word flow, and he says that you get flow when you're doing a highly technical thing, and you're doing it well, and you're doing it to the extent that time just flies. And like a lot of people will call that the runner's high. I've never experienced the runner's high. I only ever experience the runner's misery. But there are times when I do experience what I would consider flow when I'm writing. And that's when I'm deeply connected to what the character wants in the situation, and doing it pretty correctly based on the roadblocks that are in their way. Now, my agent has accused me very often. She will say, I can tell when you're having a good time, quit having such a good time. And that's when I'm showing off with dialogue. And she'll be like, that was funny. Ha ha ha. We're taking it out. And I think,
That is funny.
yeah. But yeah.
Yeah, and it's related to the idea of this thought work, because when you start thinking about this stuff as you're walking the dog, etc., it sort of inhabits your subconscious, right? And so, it's part of that flow state, or part of the writing that the character is writing the story. It's still just you, but it's so your subconscious is allowed to sort of work on it all the time, and so you're coming up with some things that surprise you.
Mm-hmm. Candace, you should email me because I think I know a group that does something like this, and I can attach you to the person. So my email is garvina@uww.edu. I don't think I can comment. I think that yeah. So because I think there's a person that I might be able to connect you to that knows about that.
Good.
Yeah. And I don't, otherwise than that, you could start a meetup maybe, but I will say writers groups are difficult because, again, the people can't be annoying, and often writers are annoying, and so it's it's good to have a writers group for sure. I have a writers group of 2 people that don't live in my town. And it's a great idea to have that. And one of the best things, the way to do that is go to the conferences like Chicago Writers Conference or the Madison Writers Institute or Right by the Lake, because you do meet people then that you will like, and will most likely join a writers group with you.
Definitely. Yeah. If you like them in person, then it's also likely that it'll work over Zoom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
So, which is the other advantage. Writers groups work quite well over Zoom. So
mm-hmm.
I put a couple links in the.
I hope that what my comments weren't too esoteric today. I really hope that people understand what we're trying to do in a way that doesn't feel like repetitive.
Right. But yeah, it is something that is about kind of dwelling on it, and
it is. It's dwelling on this idea of character want, and then what are going to be the things that knock them out of the way, and I like Tim and I were talking about, like, wouldn't it be fun for us to talk through how we did a few of the book ideas that I have, but I don't want to give those books out in case somebody does decide to buy them. But but it is it comes from this discussion of what if. And then you need somebody to go, okay, that's kind of fun, but what if this? And then kind of riff off your idea.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we will wrap up there. I don't know, I'm experimenting with this. I think in the comments, maybe you can click on links and they actually take you places. I'm not sure. So I put a couple links there to Anne's site and the PayPal link and this schedule that I have up in front of you. And again, the next one is in a week. So join us for that. Like same sort of format and super casual, but allow you to ask some questions in the comments. And it's really fun to interact with people in the comments. This is, I think,
Oh my gosh.
I was talking beforehand about how we miss live teaching and we miss that interaction with people. But this is, you know, as close as we're going to get for now.
Yeah, it's so much fun for me.
Yeah.
I would do this. I just love doing it. Like, I'm so glad that Tim asked me to do it because it's nice to be able to talk about something you love so much.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Thank you all. And again, this will be recorded, so you can come back to this later if you missed anything. And we'll see you next time, hopefully.
Yeah. Bye. We'll see you next 2 weeks.
1 week.
1 week.
Yep.
Okay. I'll write it in my calendar right now.
All right. All right.